Picture this. You're a monk living peacefully in a monastery on the English coast. It's the year 793. The morning is calm, quiet, until you see something on the horizon that makes your blood run cold. Long serpentine shapes cutting through the waves, getting closer, getting faster. The Vikings have arrived. But here's the thing, everyone gets wrong about the Viking. They weren't just brutal raiders who happened to be good with boats. No, these people from the frozen north had cracked a code that no one else in medieval Europe could figure out. They had mastered the sea itself. Today, we're diving into one of history's most incredible maritime stories. How did a handful of people from some of the most inhospitable lands on earth become the most feared and respected seafarers of their age? How did they sail further, strike faster, and explore deeper than anyone thought possible? This is the story of how the Vikings didn't just raid Europe, they revolutionized it. Let's start with a simple question. Why did the Vikings become masters of the sea in the first place? The answer lies in their homeland. Scandinavia in the 8th century wasn't exactly a paradise. We're talking about a landscape that seemed designed to test human endurance. Endless forests so thick you could get lost for days. Coastlines jagged with rocks that could tear a ship apart. Winters so brutal they lasted half the year. And farmland. Good luck finding enough to feed your family. But here's what's fascinating. Instead of breaking the Vikings, these conditions forged them into something extraordinary. When the land gives you nothing, you look to the sea for everything. And the sea, well, the sea was infinite. Now, if you want to understand Viking dominance, you need to understand their greatest weapon. And it wasn't an axe or a sword. It was the ship, but not just any ships. These were vessels unlike anything the world had ever seen. While everyone else was building floating battering rams, the Vikings were crafting something closer to sea serpents. Long, narrow, impossibly flexible. The secret was something called clinker building. Instead of building a rigid hull, Viking shipwrights overlapped wooden planks like scales on a snake. This gave their ships an almost living quality. They could bend and flex with the waves instead of fighting them. Think about that for a moment. While other ships were being pounded to pieces by rough seas, Viking longships were dancing with the ocean. And here's the genius part. These ships had an incredibly shallow draft. That meant they could sail not just across oceans, but up rivers, deep into the heart of enemy territory. Imagine being a king in medieval Europe, thinking your castle is safe because it's miles inland. Then suddenly, Viking longships are sliding up your river like ghostly shadows. That's not just naval superiority, that's psychological warfare. But having incredible ships is only half the story. Because here's something that should blow your mind. The Vikings sailed from Scandinavia to North America in the year 1000 without compasses, without GPS, without even proper maps. So how did they do it? They turned themselves into human navigation computers. Viking navigators didn't just know their local waters, they memorized entire coastlines. They could read the ocean like a book. The color of the water told them about depth. The flight patterns of birds told them about nearby land. Even the smell of the wind carried information. But the most incredible part, they might have used something called sunstones, crystals that could polarize light even on cloudy days. With these, they could find the sun's position even when it was completely hidden. Picture a Viking navigator standing on deck in the middle of a storm, holding up a crystal, and somehow still knowing exactly which way to steer. That's not just skill, that's borderline supernatural. Here's where the story gets really interesting, because we've all heard about Viking raids, right? The burning monasteries, the terrified villagers, the stolen treasure. But that's only part of the picture. The same ships that brought terror to English shores also carried merchants to Russian rivers. The same navigators who planned lightning raids also established trade routes that stretched from Greenland to Constantinople. Think about this. While most of medieval Europe was stuck in their own little kingdoms, the Vikings had created a network that spanned continents. They were bringing Arctic furs to Mediterranean markets. They were carrying Byzantine silk to Scandinavian halls. In England, they were raiders. In Russia, they were the Varangians, elite guards and traders who helped build the foundations of the Russian state. In Iceland, they were pioneers settling a volcanic island no one else dared to touch. Same people, same ships, completely different roles depending on what the situation required. That's not just maritime mastery, that's strategic genius. Let's talk about what made Viking raids so devastatingly effective. It wasn't just about being fierce warriors, it was about being unpredictable ghosts. A Viking longship could appear out of nowhere. One moment, the horizon was empty. The next, dragon-headed ships were sliding onto your beach. By the time you realized what was happening, it was already too late. The shallow draft of their ships meant they could land almost anywhere, not just at ports or harbors, but on any stretch of coastline. This turned the entire coast of Europe into potential landing zones. Strike fast, take what you came for, disappear before anyone could mount a proper defense. But in open sea battles, that's where things got really interesting. Vikings would lash their ships together, creating floating fortresses. Suddenly, a sea battle became something closer to a land battle, and nobody was better at close combat than Viking warriors. But perhaps the most incredible legacy of Viking seamanship wasn't about conquest or trade. It was about something much more fundamental to human nature: curiosity. In the late 9th century, when most Europeans thought the world ended at their own borders, Vikings were settling Iceland, a volcanic island in the middle of the North Atlantic that no one else had even considered inhabitable. From Iceland, Eric the Red pushed further west and found Greenland. And from Greenland, his son Leif Erikson sailed even further, all the way to North America, 500 years before Columbus. Let that sink in for a moment. While the rest of Europe was arguing about whose god was better, Vikings were literally discovering new continents. That's what happens when you combine incredible ships, supernatural navigation skills, and an unquenchable thirst to see what's beyond the horizon. But every golden age has to end eventually. By the 11th century, the world was changing. Christian kingdoms across Europe had learned from their encounters with Vikings. Coasts were fortified, rivers were blocked, armies grew larger and better organized. At the same time, Scandinavia itself was transforming. The old pagan ways were giving way to Christianity. Tribal societies were becoming centralized kingdoms. The very conditions that had created the Vikings were disappearing. The age of the longship was coming to an end. But their influence? That was just beginning. So what can we learn from the Vikings and their conquest of the high seas? It wasn't superior weapons or overwhelming numbers that made them dominant. It was innovation. It was adaptability. It was the courage to sail into the unknown when everyone else was content to stay home. From the icy fjords of Scandinavia, they carved out a maritime empire that stretched across 3 continents. They were simultaneously destroyers and builders, raiders and traders, warriors and explorers. But most importantly, they proved something fundamental about human potential. When your back is against the wall, when your homeland offers nothing but hardship, you have 2 choices: give up or look beyond the horizon. The Vikings chose the horizon, and in doing so, they didn't just conquer the seas, they expanded the very limits of what humans thought was possible. The next time you look out at the ocean, remember this: somewhere out there, 1,000 years ago, Viking navigators were using nothing but crystal stones and bird flight patterns to sail further than anyone had ever gone before. That's not just history, that's inspiration. What do you think? Could you have been a Viking navigator sailing into the unknown with nothing but your wits and a crystal stone? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories from history that'll change how you see the world.